the co-chair of this committee along with Jean. Jean, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yep, I'm Jean Restman. Besides being Carol's co-chair, I am the administrator of the Office of Passenger Transportation at the Michigan Department of Transportation.
Thanks, Jean.
Yeah.
And we've still got a couple of folks joining, but I'm going to go ahead and very quickly run through our agenda just so that you know kind of how the meeting is structured. So first, I would ask if everyone could put their name and organization in the chat, please. We're going to use that as our sign-in sheet. So that would be very helpful if you could do that. And let me just share my screen for those of you who might not have the agenda, just so you're aware of what we'll be doing. You should see the agenda on the screen right now. So we're going to start off our mid-year meeting with two really interesting presentations. We have not spoken a lot about governance or standards in our committee thus far, but those are two very, very important topics. And we have two really wonderful speakers today. So we'll kick off the meeting in a little bit with those two presentations. Unfortunately, our research chair, Michael Berman, is not here, but we can bring you up to speed on a couple of the things that we're working on in the research subcommittee. And then Adam Cohen and David Kuhn are here in the meeting and can talk about our paper review process. Once again, if folks recall from last year, even though we did a virtual annual committee meeting, we had a considerable number of papers. And so we wanted folks to just understand what the process was for the 2022 annual meeting in January. And then we just have some discussions in different parts of the committee. Jean and I will just talk about some of the activities going on. And then we have Charlotte and Adam to talk about our one sort of official subcommittee and some of the work that's going on there. And I will eventually ask if we have anyone in the audience who is with AP055, which is the Rural Intercity Bus and Specialized Transportation Committee, or the Accessible Transportation and Mobility Committee, to just give us a very brief update. And then we'll talk very briefly about the triennial strategic plan. Actually, not a lot to say about that, but we'll bring you up to speed. And then last but definitely not least is the upcoming conference for advancing transportation equity. And we have a couple of folks who are sort of leading the charge for that conference to tell us about it. We do have an equity subcommittee, and this is a topic that we're very, very interested in our committee. So we wanted folks to have an opportunity to hear about that conference. And then hopefully at the very end, we'll have a couple of minutes for any other committee business that folks want to bring up. So for folks just joining, if you could put your name and organization in the chat, that's what we will be using for our sign-in sheet. And Jean, did I miss anything? Are we, you're on mute, Jean.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I think you got everything. I think we can get going with the agenda.
All right, so our first big agenda item is, as I showed you in our agenda, and I'll just quickly put that up again so you can see, we've got two really exciting presentations. One on the Gecko project, and Yannick is going to talk to us. He's been the project manager for this project for UITP. And following Yannick will be Bern Grush from Harmonized Mobility. And Bern has been working on sidewalk and curb standardization for a number of really important reasons. I'm going to let him speak to us about that. But what we'll do is we'll run through Yannick's presentation about 10 minutes, and we'll give you all about 5 minutes to ask questions of Yannick. And then we'll move to Bern's presentation again for about 10 minutes. And then we'll give you all 5 minutes after Bern's presentation for more questions. So feel free to enter the questions in the chat. Prachi will be monitoring those and making sure we get to as many of them as we can. So with that, Yannick, go ahead.
Okay.
Are you
So
able
you should
to?
be able to, yes, I was just projecting my screen. You should be able to see this now. If you do not yet, then just let me know. I'm putting it on.
It's perfect.
Great.
Yep.
So thank you very much, Carol, and Jean also for the invitation to this committee. So as mentioned, I would like to speak to you today about this project called Gecko. Now, this is a European funded project, which is coming close to an end now. Actually, it's running for almost 3 years, and it's really looking at the regulation and governance of new mobility solutions and providing tools and guidelines for authorities on how they can better regulate these new mobility solutions which are coming into our urban areas. So I'll give you a bit of a background first about this project. So looking at a future mobility scenario, we can see already they can have some good scenarios where we would have a strong integration of new mobility services with public transport, which could be used as the backbone of urban mobility. And it could go into different ways, either a hyper efficient future mobility scenario, which is kind of ecologically focused, or a technologically focused, as you see here on the screen now, with apps or new public transport services and solutions. Or if you go into the other direction, we can see a mismanagement basically of these public transport and new mobility solutions, where we have individualization of these services and mismanagement of these services and basically chaos in the urban mobility system. So what do we need to make the best use out of these new mobility services, technologies, business models, and disruptive innovations? So we need a good regulatory framework conditions and also the right cooperation between public authorities and also the private sector, being industry, business, and operators. And that's where this project comes into play then. And we started this by looking at what are the main innovations that we wanted to look at into this project. And we came with 4 different categories of this. You can see this on the screen. So we have connected, cooperative, and automated mobility, infrastructure, network, and traffic management, mass and mass platforms, and shared and on-demand mobility. And then we were able to break this down into some individual innovations and services and solutions. But to give you an idea of this, so we have, for example, we looked at connected and automated vehicles, MaaS, bike sharing, e-scooter sharing, these different services and solutions here. Then we thought, well, what are these business models? What are these innovations that are coming in to our cities now at the moment? And we were able to look at these business models. You see here an example on the screen of shared and on-demand mobility. And we were able to break this down. So what is, for example, the main value created by this service here? So for a user, for a traveler, the main value which is proposed to them is that this service combines the advantages of a private vehicle, but also with the advantages also of collective transport also. So they don't need to own a car, they can pay as they use, easy parking, etc. How is this value delivered to the end user, to the customer? This is delivered through various online channels, mainly applications, basically. And how is this value captured by the service provider? It could be via monthly subscription fees, by pay-as-you-go services. And that's just to give an example. And we did this for the various innovations also. And we did this using business model canvases. And you can see an example of this on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. So once we had the business models, basically the technologies, the services, we also looked at then, what is the regulation that came in as a response to that business model? So what are the recent regulations which came into at the national level, regional level, city level, that was a response to this new service or solution? And we were able to collect 228 of these regulations related to new mobility solutions, and we also did an analysis of this. And this is captured what we have called the Gecko compliance map. And this is basically, you can see an extract of this map on your bottom left of the screen now. And with this, we're able to look at what is the effectiveness of a country or of a city in regulating various aspects which are needed to introduce new mobility solutions. So this could be safety, environmental aspects, data, etc. How well do they score in an effectiveness to introduce these new mobility solutions? That's one part of the compliance map. Then we also looked at how ready is a country or a region or a city to introduce these new mobility solutions also. And that's also another part of it. And we also looked at what are some of the barriers for the introduction of these services. As you can see on the map, we looked at this throughout the world, and we're able to collect these regulations in North America, South America and Brazil, a lot of Europe, also in China, Singapore, India, Australia, and Nigeria also. We have some collection of regulations also. So you can see we managed to have a wide coverage of these regulations which we have collected. In the US, for example, we've collected 20 regulations in cities such as Chicago, New York, Denver also, and in Canada also, Montreal, Vancouver, and Toronto, to give some examples. One point that we also looked at is what is the cooperation that takes place between public parties and private parties. To come to sort of well-fitting regulations, you need to have also this cooperation between these different parties. So some different models that look into this, we saw if you would like to have a more looser type of cooperation between the two, if you have a new service which is coming in and you would not like to regulate it too strictly, then you could have a memorandum of understanding. This can be in place in some cities. Or if you would like to regulate more strictly and more rigid, then the traditional contracts come into place there. And then it could be management contracts, concessions, or licenses for this. Or in some cases, we saw that there is even less cooperation between the two parties, where information is shared informally or not even shared at all between the various parties. And one important aspect of this cooperation we also saw would be what is the role of data in this cooperation. So data could be used to select a potential partner from the public authority they would use data then to measure the positive impacts of new mobility providers and to measure this against the goals of the authorities. And for that, data is an important part there. Or they could use this data then for enforcement and compliance. So they could use this to facilitate a smooth and hassle-free enforcement and compliance using smart techniques for this, using data. Or as you see in the last point there, basically regulation is also a fluid aspect also. So you could use the data to adjust the regulatory framework depending on the either success or lack of success of the new mobility solution. If you would like to stimulate it or maybe deter it somewhat, then you could use this regulation to do this purpose. As we're coming to the end of the project, actually we're finishing next month. I would like to share also some information where you can find some more resources of what is in the project. We've just completed 2 final reports actually on, from one side on the new mobility services, businesses, and technologies, which you can see in the report on the left-hand side. And there this covers also what has been the impact on COVID-19, from COVID-19 on these new mobility solutions, that's included there. And also we just completed another report which is looking at the regulatory responses and the governance models, which I mentioned. And this also has a full report about this if you would like to find more information about that. Then finally, just to say that as the project is coming to an end next month, we will also have a final project event and where we will present more and more detailed about the results. And this will take place on the 25th and the 26th of August. And we have 2 time slots depending on where you are and where you're logging in. So for if you're in Europe or Central European time, those are the times you will see on the screen at the moment. We have a slot at 10 o'clock in the morning, and that's then repeated at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So depending on where you are, maybe the 3 o'clock afternoon slot for the European time will fit better for the North American time. And that's repeat. And then the second day of the final event takes place on the 26th, again, with the same structure of timing. So I would stop there for the presentation. There you can see the registration link for this final event. And I'm happy to see if there's any questions that I could try to respond to.
Thanks very much, Yannick. I just reminded folks to put their questions in the chat. I have an initial question for you that I think I'll ask since I don't see any questions yet in the chat. And Prachi, I don't believe there are any yet. But one thing, Yannick, I was very, I was thrilled to be a participant in part of the project. And one thing that I was interested in, and this is a very, very simple and sort of basic question. Did you find that there are actually more regulations being developed for actual physical mobility services like, you know, bike sharing and scooter sharing versus those services that are really not physical, like mobility as a service or mobility on demand? Because we discussed both during the project. So I was curious about that.
Yes. Actually, what you see on the screen now at the moment on the bottom, it's a bit difficult to read there, but there you can see the regulations which we have been able to collect. So we collected actually quite a lot for ride hailing and TNC operators, but compare that to on-demand ride sharing and carpooling, we actually collected considerably less regulations for that. Also MaaS, we collected less regulations. for data, big data for mobility, we collected less regulations. I think what it also depended on is we saw this also related to the cooperation between public and private parties. How advanced is the business model? How advanced is the technology in the introduction into the cities? And then you would see there the regulatory responses would follow after that. And so, for example, we looked at passenger urban air mobility, something which is being developed now, but it's not quite there yet in terms of the regulations, the technologies, and there we saw then quite a considerably less in our project. But for car sharing, bike sharing, TNCs, ride hailing, there we were able to collect quite a lot of regulations. The services which were more digitalized, mass and big data, there we had a bit less of those, which we were having our database and the compliance map also.
Thank you for that. I do see one question from David.
There's a request, Carol. Can I, while he's still on that slide, somebody
Please.
want to know if you would zoom in on that slide, because we can't read the classifications under the bar chart. It's too little. So if you could maybe zoom in on the bar chart.
Sure. If I can reach. Oops. No. Here we
Beautiful.
go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great, because then we can read what's under the various bars. Thanks for that. In the meantime, which probably doesn't require you show another slide, but David has a question. How are you engaging with member states and local agencies on the implementation of study results?
Okay, so we have an important part of the project which we have been working with is our inputs, and our content has been generated a lot by our what we call our stakeholder hub. And Carol has been part of this, and she's been taking part of the workshops and the various stakeholder events which we've been organized. And this has been a range of around 200 different stakeholders from the private sector and public sector. And from the public sector, this has been from local authorities, regional and national authorities. And they have been our main source of data inputs and resource collections. And they have been providing really a key part of the content in this project. This has been through studies that they have already made, or via workshops and surveys which we have conducted.
Oh, I've got one other question, but I'll give you a short time to answer it. We're a little bit over time, but that's all right. Is it a right assumption that you see more regulations on the classification with more maturity?
The classification and more maturity of a technology or a business model in that sense?
So let's see if, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself.
If that is the question,
Yeah.
basically, then indeed, that's we managed to also come up with a scale for this, which we called our regulation readiness level. And this basically followed the maturity of the technology also. So based on that, you would have further regulation and deeper regulation also, depending on the maturity of the technologies and the services.
Makes sense. All right. I hate to cut off because we do have a couple of other questions. Maybe, Yannick, when you have a minute, you can take a look at those in the chat. But let's move on to our, first of all, thank you so much for your presentation. Yannick was excellent. I also greatly appreciate that it's later in the day for you than it is for those of us in the US. So thank you very much. And if you do have a moment and you want to look at the questions in the chat, feel free. And so our next speaker is
Thank
Bern
you.
Crush. And Bern, without further ado, take it away.
Thank you. My screen visible?
Not yet.
No? Huh. So I need to share my screen somehow. That's what I didn't do.
Do you have a red box?
That's
It's looking good.
all right. Thank you.
And before you launch, if I can ask everybody to mute themselves, that would be great. It's all yours, Bern.
Thanks, Carol. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about a new, well, I'm not going to talk about the technology. I think we're all aware that there's sidewalk robots, delivery robots, and so forth. But I'm going to talk about a standard that's been in process now for a little bit more than a year and a half, that I'm the project leader on. It's an ISO standard, and it's specifically about dealing with these robots in public spaces, both robots delivering passengers, robo-taxis and shuttles, and also goods delivery. But this is specifically about loading and unloading and about use of the sidewalk. So it's a narrow subset of this whole body of technology. So these are some of the instances. I'm just going to focus mostly on the sidewalk robot aspect of it. Up on the upper left is a robot metering a sidewalk, mapping a sidewalk. Here's one sweeping a sidewalk. Here's one plowing snow. This one is a surveillance device. There's many examples of each of these. These are just a few, one snap of each. I don't know how many companies are working on this, but there's dozens of companies working in each of these domains. So there's certainly well over 100 innovators and manufacturers and companies building these things, various purposes. And here's one on the bottom right, which is not even one that I've seen, and that is this is an LPR camera, a license plate recognition camera in a parking lot. I think we're all familiar with the existence of that technology for the last decade or more. Well, that could easily be mounted on a robot, and so it would be quite easy to replace the human driver that's inside this vehicle and to do license plate as well. So many different purposes and so many different vendors. And what's key about this problem is that there's non-involved humans. In other words, as these robots are working in whatever space they work in, public space, laneways and sidewalks and so forth, there's humans that are not involved with this process. In other words, it's not like in a warehouse floor where the humans are working there. And so that is a key issue, a key concern. Very briefly, these devices face far fewer barriers than robotic passenger vehicles. So we're all waiting impatiently for the last 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 12 years for this robo-taxi to finally show up, and it's almost never showing up. But all of the barriers that the robo-taxi and the goods delivery motorized vehicle on the road face are all lower barriers for the robotic delivery device. It's just an easier deployment, an easier regulatory, and so on. I'm going to just underscore on the far right this thing called full autonomy. We really need a passenger vehicle to be really, really competent. It's not okay that the passenger vehicle needs to be taken over by the driver. You can't have a bus or a taxi system where the passenger has to take over. So we don't have that problem in the delivery robot because they're all teleoperated. It may be the case, I'll show you a slide in a moment, it may be a case that the operator is intervening only once in a while, or quite frequently, but that doesn't matter. If you're having something delivered to you in such a delivery robot, all that matters is that you get what you're waiting for, and you're not concerned about the fact that somebody has to take over. You would care about that if you were in a taxi. So that's a big deal that these robots don't have to contend with. So overall, the entire picture is there's a lower order of risk by almost an order of magnitude. And so what that means is that we're absolutely expecting to see these things at scale long before we see robotaxis at scale. Here's an example. This just came out a couple of days ago, and I'm putting it here for amusement. Well, it may not be that funny to some of us, but in a sense, we've been watching Elon Musk's nonsense with his self-driving, full self-driving vehicle for the last 5 or 6 years. And we've been very distracted with that message. And now we're delivering pizza, and these companies are, some of these delivering companies, this one is still in trial, but some of these delivery companies, there's one here in Toronto that's actually delivering food and charging for it and making business, as has Starship now for a couple of years. So these vehicles, without any place for humans to operate them at all, except for teleoperation, are actually starting to be in business. And so this one particular company thinks, well, the future is in these vehicles. I'm starting to think it's true. And so the joke on us here is that after we've invested on the order of $200 billion over the last decade, we find out that this whole industry, this whole autonomous vehicle industry, it's really about delivering pizza, which is appalling. But right now, that's where the needle is pointing. So back to reality, or back to more sober messaging here. I pointed out to you that sidewalk robots are teleoperated, telemonitoring. So there's a person somewhere in a room with some or multiple screens that may be operating 2 or 3 or 4 robots at once. In the beginning, when someone's starting, they're operating one. The company that's in the lead can operate sort of 2 or 3 at a time. We want to get to the point where one operator with a whole bank of screens and some very clever software could operate on average 10 or 20 per person. So this is in the future, a few years away. We're not there yet. But when we reach the point where a bank of teleoperators can operate, let's say 10 people can operate 200 robots by switching off and so on, I think that's where this is going. And that's where we drive the cost out. And that's where the scale begins. What happens when we get to scale? This is the reason I'm introducing the reasons for the standard that I'm working on. Again, I underscore it's multi-vendor, variable purpose, and right here we're just showing delivery. Well, what if one of these robots would also needed to be plowing the snow at the same time or sweeping at the same time, running on the schedule that they wish to run on for whatever their jobs are, and so on. And all the humans in the picture are going about their own business. They have nothing to do with these robots at all. How is that really going to work? What kind of a traffic control system, a behavioral management system for the robots? How will this work out? So here's some examples. Again, all fictional examples. What if the robots were regulated to be and software operated to be shy, like they stand back and they stand out of the way until there's an opening for them? This is on the left. Up on the top, what if they line up very nicely in a very orderly fashion, but not very intelligently, and they end up with their order of things blocking pedestrian traffic, for example? What if there's simply too many of them in the bottom? There's just simply a lot of them, and we're contending for space and arguing for space. They're standing back in this little drawing on the bottom, but there's just too many, for example. What happens then, or how can we prevent that, or would that happen? And what if, even in the worst case, what if these were all programmed to be competitive and to jostle for space and to get in front of a line to charge across the intersection, for example, on the right? These are all possible circumstances. I'm not saying any of them are on or off, but these are all the kinds of things that could happen if this industry does what it has to do to be profitable. So in all of this, standards are becoming more critical. So this image is about the very brief history of robots over the past, I don't know, 40 years or 50 years, where they started out to be all stationary robots in factories. We've moved to mobile robots over the past decade or more, maybe 15 years. And mostly the mobile robots are for mining, farming, or factory or warehouse and so forth. But these are constrained environments that are away from you. I mean, if you think about a mine or a factory, there's people who work there are either trained to work with or collaborate with or be wary of the robots. They're not competing with the robots, or they're not, basically they're not out on the sidewalk walking their dog while the robot's trying to do its work. So that is, up until now, we've had constrained environments, almost non-human environments. But in the last several years, we've run into something known as the multi-vendor problem, as more and more of these robots invented by more and more companies collaborate in the same space. So you can have a warehouse, an Amazon warehouse has many of their own robots from Amazon robots, but they also have robots from other vendors, and they have to collaborate. So that's where we begin our story. We're now moving into shared public space, the sidewalk, the bikeway, the roadway, and so forth. And we're going to mix them now with other vehicles, automated, non-automated vehicles. We're going to mix them with non-involved humans. And I mentioned this already, but I want to underscore that these are of many ages, skills, abilities, people in wheelchairs, older people, people walking their children, walking their dogs. So all sorts of complex human skills and behaviors that we're sharing this with. And I'm saying, and that's what the standard is about, there's going to have to be some form of traffic management, and it's not going to be little red lights and stop signs. There's going to be some form of digitalized traffic management that's going to be communicated to these vendors in some way. And I also underscore that we may have to be starting to price these spaces, just as we now price the curb for parking. We may have to price the sidewalk. So the standard permits all of those things. It doesn't say that they have to happen, but they permit all of those things. And this is the boundary line. So we have already many industry standards, but the industry standards are insufficient for managing public spaces. Those are industry standards are for the machine operators to talk to each other so they can collaborate on the factory floor or on the farm. It's not the same problem as that we have in the city. So this dividing line is the critical difference between what I'm talking about and what's gone down until now. So a little more than a year ago, it was established, ISO 4448 it's called, ground-based automated mobility. And these are the things that it's data protocol for all levels of automation. In other words, if a taxi of level 3 wants to bring a passenger somewhere, there's a way for that vehicle to be reserved, a spot for that vehicle to be reserved, or a communication that knows that the vehicle's coming, that sort of thing. So, of course, on the sidewalk, I already told you they're teleoperated. They appear to us to be fully automated, but we don't care about the teleoperator. What we care about is how that vehicle is going to behave when it's traveling on the sidewalk, for example. There's 11 parts. I won't read them all, but you can skim through that list. These are the different segments of the standard. This is going to be developed and worked on between now. There's drafts for the first 3. All the rest are in outline. And this is the work for the next 4 years. And where you see an S is sidewalk, so that those 8 standards touch on the sidewalk, and the other 6 with a K touch on the curb, and the 4 that have both S and K touch on both the sidewalk and the curb. You might wonder why we're doing both in one sort of paired set of standards, a coordinated set of standards, and that is because of number 7. Number 7 is a goods vehicle brings many deliveries. Imagine it's 10 years from now, and a FedEx vehicle, automated, needs a place to stop, and it unloads 4 robots to make the local deliveries in let's just say a half a kilometer radius around where the truck is parked, for example. That is a scenario that's being very seriously talked about and developed. And in order for the rules of operation on the curbside, on the road side of the curb, and on the pavement or sidewalk side, that has to be coordinated. Therefore, these are all a single coordinated body of standards. There's really two major parts. And that is, there's a whole body of data. It's a data dictionary for all sorts of things, like how do you describe vehicles and places, reservations, and so on. Lots of things about behaviors. I showed you some images of some behaviors that we may or may not wish these robots to exhibit. So how do you describe those behaviors and how do you name them? If you want, for example, if you want a robot to always leave a certain distance between themselves and humans, that distance is called a shy distance. Not the same as a social distance. It doesn't have anything to do with viruses. It has to do with the leaving a sufficient amount of space for humans. So you may want to regulate that, and the standard permits that to be regulated. It doesn't say what those numbers are. It allows the municipality to say what those numbers are. That's just an example on the left. And on the right, there's got to be a lot of procedural guidelines. So, for example, it may be the case that robots always give way to humans, except when the robot is a special classification as an emergency robot. It may be that the robot's related to fire or emergency. It could be. So how are those exceptions declared? And how are those communicated? And how do the other operators know? How does FedEx know? It's not because we're going to be running sirens up and down the sidewalk like we do on the streets, but how do the other vehicles know to give way to these vehicles? And how do humans know that, in fact, certain robots do have a right of way for emergency purposes? So how is all that to be handled? This is a complicated slide. So very briefly, fundamentally, sidewalk robots are going to drive up delivery volumes and same-day delivery. You know, every time humans invent something that we like, we just use more of it. So this has the huge risk of turning same-day delivery or same-week delivery into same-day and same-day delivery into same-hour deliveries. That's the way these things go. That's going to change congestion. That's going to challenge planning. And that's going to require monetization. So there's a lot of things that aren't just about, is the sidewalk wide enough? There's a lot of other things that come into play here that influence everything. I'll give you an example. This group might be very concerned about transit. What do we do about the street, the block face that has the exit to the train station? How do we make sure that during the morning rush hour, when there's every 6 minutes, there's a burst of 80 people coming out of the transit exit, how do we know to keep robots away at that time, for example? Lots of challenges like that we haven't thought through because we haven't had this technology before. We have never put automated machines on sidewalks. We put machines on roadways all the time. So we're introducing machines to sidewalks and automated machines to sidewalks at the same time. It's a very challenging step we're taking. So I just wanted to point that out. I also want to point out, and this is, again, back to monetization, this is all going to require money because of it being a complex system. And they're just getting ready for these and so forth. If we're not going to ban them, I mean, one way is simply ban them. That's one route that can be taken. But that's not a route that everyone's going to take. And then if you're going to use them, they have to be managed. And if you're going to manage them, it's going to take money. If it's going to take money, you have a system, and so there's a circle. You can call it a virtuous circle here if you wish. But if these come at scale, and they're properly priced at scale, and we can properly manage them. So that scale and the monetization and all comes together. It's a very large, complex picture we're looking at. So here's I think my last slide. What I'm up to is I work with stakeholders and sponsors. There's 11 cities that I work with, cities like Lisbon and London and Pittsburgh, and Washington, D.C., and Orlando are just a few that come off the top of my mind here. I'm working with a dozen vendors. There's still 5 vacancies. I put that out because if there's anybody on this call that knows a company that ought to know about this work, I would like to have them know about it, to become a sponsor of the work. The sponsors are financial sponsors, stakeholders are not. Cities are not paying to help with this, but the planners and the robot operators and the logistics operators are helping financially. We meet 3 times a year, and I welcome observers. If anybody on this call wishes to be an observer, what that means is you attend the 3 meetings, and you just simply watch. Just like you're watching me now, you simply watch the meeting. You're not participating. If you're a stakeholder, you're actually at the table participating in a roundhouse conversation. So that would be basically how it works, is that on the far right-hand side is the ISO. I'm the person in the center who's coordinating all the documents going back and forth with the ISO. And on the left are the sponsors and the stakeholders that I just spoke about. So that is how the work is carried out in that way. Okay. So
Thank you, Bern.
Thank you.
Prachi, do you want to go through the questions?
Yeah, surely. Bern, I think some of the really interesting questions just lie around the curb. So Todd Goldman from Port Authority, New York, New Jersey is curious. Do you even consider urban management strategies that exclude these vehicles from operating on the sidewalk, or is that interaction really key to the standards you're making? Let's start there, and then I'll go through the.
So the standard. Well, you don't need a standard to exclude them. You just need to have a municipal bylaw that says no. So it's easy to exclude. However, that's not a good answer, because you will find, well, we don't want them in, here's all the places we do not want them, but there are some places we do want them. In fact, we want them on the campus, and we want them in, there may be a business improvement district of like a small radius, and there may be 6,000 or 7,000 homes, and we would like them there, and so on. So what the standard permits is a map, and on that map, block face by block face, not any, right now the resolution of the map is block face. You say a schedule and a number. So on this block face, between 8 and 10 a.m., 0, because that's the transit is letting, people, it's a rush hour. But between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m., you can have 4 at once.
All right. So related question by Steve is, then do we need to design the curb space itself? Does it require redesign?
The standard does not require redesign. What the standard does is, and I'm going to refer to this. So in this up in part 2, there's a definition in the data. There's the width and the slope and there's cross slopes and multiple slopes. You need the logistics operator to understand the terrain that they're going to travel on. So that all of that's known about the sidewalk. You don't have to redo the sidewalks, but you may, for example, you may have a sidewalk. I have many in Toronto, a sidewalk where the utility pole and the wall, so the distance between a utility pole and the wall is just merely enough for a single wheelchair to pass. A wheelchair can barely get through. You could not ever pass, like a robot and a human could not pass that space at once at the same time. The robot would have to wait, for example. So those spaces, you might say, you know what, we really want a free and open flow of everything. In order to do that, what do we have to do? So if you look down at part 10, part 10 asks 2 questions, and this is directly the answer to the question. What do I have to do to allow 2 robots to pass at the same time? So that sidewalk now has a very different specification than the specification, accessibility specification. The accessibility specification is certain width for a wheelchair to pass. If you want to pass a wheelchair and the robot at the same time, that's almost double the width. So that certification says, here's what you have to do. If you have to say, what is it that you want to do? Then the certification allows you to say what you have to do that. It's also the case, you can ask the same question the opposite way. You can say, well, here, I have a sidewalk. What do you think I should do? so the certification works both ways.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So you talked about collecting data as part of the certification, right? And then the question, which are somewhat related, I think, are like, who validates this data? Like, my question would be like, do city agencies, or is there a third party that's like doing this data validation now? Like, who do you expect to be validating it and holding the any private company accountable for it? And then related question by David is, who are the government agencies that own and operate streets and sidewalks? How is ISO engaging them?
So ISO won't, so there's no specification of what a city should do. In other words, should a city have a certain office or a certain set of procedures? What the standard sets out is how to go about that certification. The city might say, we don't care. Or the city might say, oh, we care very much. We're going to set up an office of certification and we're going to operate that our way. And we'll look at the standard to see some guidelines, but we're going to do it the way we want to. So a standard is always, I mean, you have a business and you can use ISO 9000 or not. It's up to you. Most businesses don't.
So if they decide then, if they decide to then use the standard, right, and they hold these companies accountable and get them to share data, how do they go about validating the data as well? And I know that third-party players in the micromobility world, for example, that take this data, aggregate for cities, make it usable. Do you see those kind of companies coming up as well, or do you see this more in-house capacity from cities to use it?
I see both. I see those kinds of companies come. So first of all, I told you these 11 steps are a 4-year process. I'm at step 3. So I think you can just do some simple math and you can see I'm going to be writing this stuff in 2023. So whoever asked that question, please give me a call. I'm going to put him to work, him or her to work.
Okay. Fantastic.
It's up to us. It's up to the people on this call to write these standards.
If we can sign up. Sorry.
Yeah.
Do we have time for more questions, Carol?
No, I think I always hate to cut off the questions because they're so good, but people can still enter them in the chat. And Bern, if you can just, hang on for a few minutes, you might be able to answer them in the chat, but we're sort of kind of back on schedule. And Bern, I just want to say thank you so much for this. Again, this is not something that we've talked about in the committee before, and we need to do that. This has been a great sort of addition to the things that we're discussing. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks for having me. I'm a black sheep.
And thanks, Prachi, for perusing the questions. Let me just now that we've had our 2 presentations, I'm just going to share my screen again for the hopefully you can see that. Here's sort of where we are in the agenda. We've got another hour or so left. And what I want to do now is bring in Adam and David to talk about the paper review process and the timeline. I know we're already well into July, and most of us that have participated in either writing a paper or reviewing a paper, we know we're coming up to the usual August 1st deadline. But Adam and David, if you want to take it away, go right ahead.
Thanks, Carol. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, Adam. Thank you.
Okay, terrific. Well, first of all, thank you again to everybody who volunteered to submit a paper, to review a paper, and to also our paper review managers that helped assist us with the review process this year. We had, depending on the day that you kind of collect the data, we had approximately 85 papers that were submitted to our committee last year. Approximately 46 of them, 45 to 46, went to either a presentation or a poster session, and approximately 10 were referred to the editorial board for further kind of review and consideration for publication. So that's a little bit on the metrics. I don't know if David is with us and wants to add anything else.
Yeah, I just want to mention that last year was unusual, and I think it was common across much of TRB, is that was actually a substantial drop from the year before. I think a lot of people were sort of, weren't able to complete research because of restrictions from the pandemic, and also weren't necessarily sure about how the annual meeting was going to be conducted, and I think that they may have held off submitting papers. So, we could be seeing a large increase, back to where we were before, which I think was like around the 120, close to 130 number, or we could still see some drop off because of restrictions in conducting work. So, certainly we appreciate all the reviewers and are always looking for more reviewers and a breadth of reviewers, just because there's so many papers and they're on so many different topics that come to this committee.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you again to all of our reviewers and our kind of those that assisted, with the review coordination as well. We really appreciate that.
So Adam, did you want me to talk a bit about the timeline, or did you want to give out some approximate dates before people, so people can plan their beach reading?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great idea, David. So just as a reminder, TRB papers are due August 1st this year. Usually the committee gets assigned papers roughly between kind of the 7th and the 10th of August. There's usually a little bit back and forth between the committees. By about August 14th, usually all the invitations for paper reviews have gone out. And then we usually do kind of rolling invitations after that. So if a paper isn't getting enough reviews, if we need additional reviews on a paper, usually you can anticipate to get kind of reviews all the way probably through around Labor Day. And so if you're interested in kind of volunteering to review, please contact us, and we'll do our best to not only provide you a paper to review, provide you the desired numbers of papers you'd like to review, but also the topic preference as well.
And that's it. I think that's the key things. And when we get closer, I mean, certainly we can give more details both on the timeline and also some. I think TRB is in the process of developing some better sort of reviewer guidance and instructions for people who are first-time reviewers, or refreshers for people who have been doing this for years.
Excellent. Does anybody have questions for David or Adam at this point?
Anyone unfamiliar with the paper review process, the website, and needs support there? Wow. Everyone's going to review papers then.
That's a good thing.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Jean, do you want to start the discussion on our next?
We do have one question here. Just how many reviews are required per paper? So last year there was a slight relaxation on the number of reviews. So previous years it was a minimum of 3, and they relaxed to 2 for papers that were not submitted for publication. I have not seen guidance this year. Of course, if we're going to recommend or review for publication, I would expect it would still be a minimum of 3, and depending on the complexity of the paper, and you may need a 4th reviewer just to cover all the aspects, particularly if there are multiple authors with different expertise. I don't know if we're going to see the ability to do 2 reviews for presentation again. Certainly, I find it useful from my perspective to have 3 reviews, just in case you get sort of two really different opinions. The third one helps sort of give you a better understanding of who might be an outlier often. But on the other hand, having two certainly was providing some flexibility last year when we had a lot of, sort of unusual circumstances. Adam, have you heard anything more recently about the ability to only have two reviews for ones that are only for presentation?
Yeah, I think that's where TRB is going right now. Is
Okay.
Two reviews at this stage for the annual meeting, three reviews for consideration for publication at the editorial board. But we sometimes have to get additional reviews to either to break a tie or to resolve discrepant reviews. And sometimes if a review isn't complete, we'll make the decision to also add additional reviewers as well.
All right.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mo. Appreciate it. Appreciate all the work that you do on this. It's a huge task, and it's one of the major tasks of any committee is reviewing papers, and we get an overabundance of them. So it's a big one. And I think that's a good segue into our next topic, was just talking about member participation in committee activities. Because as we just said, paper reviews are a major activity of the committee. So we really do need everyone to step up and volunteer to be a reviewer. Like was mentioned earlier, we get a wide variety of topics in our papers because technology goes across the boards, right? So if it's innovative and technology based to do with transportation, quite often it comes to our committee. So please do, participate in that way, especially. But then there are other ways that you can participate, and we do need everyone to be active. So, often we're asked to sponsor or co-sponsor work groups or workshops or webinars, conferences. And when we do that, it's quite often they need people from our committee to help with planning the conference or whatever event it is, or to speak or to moderate. So if you're interested in helping in those ways, please let us know. Or when you see calls come out, sometimes we'll just put a call out there to everyone that we've been asked for assistance. So responding to those. Also, which we didn't really talk about, was the research portion of this, that coming up with research topics so that we can do a call for projects, or that we can submit proposals for studies for TCRP, or any of them that fit. Being involved with that group, and Michael couldn't be here today, but he's got a small group that he's put together, but everyone is welcome to attend those meetings to discuss and refine research topics that can be moved forward. So if you're interested in that, reaching out to Carol or I, we can pass it along, or you can reach out directly to Michael Berman, and he will make sure you get invited to those meetings. And finally, we do have a subcommittee that, and Charlotte and Adam are gonna speak next. But that is another opportunity to get involved in kind of a more focused area within our committee, especially, specifically focused on equity. So, Carol, any other thoughts on that?
So the only other thing that I thought it would be worth mentioning is, and I think most everybody is aware, that when TRB did the reorganization of committees, because several of the related subcommittees were eliminated, basically, we got a good number of new members. I think we ended up with 18 more members than what we were originally allotted. And it's our understanding that within this next year or two, that we will be going back to the original number of committee members. And the only reason why I bring that up is, as everybody has kind of realized, this committee is very popular. We're covering a lot of topics that are discussed internationally, and we're constantly getting emails from people. Can we join your committee? One thing that we do look at with people being members is participation. And so all the things that Jean just mentioned, that we really ask people to participate in any way that they can in the various kinds of activities that we have. And that's always very helpful when we're in a position of looking at our membership and trying to figure out, well, who are going to be the members moving forward. And I think it's next year or so that we have a committee rotation. And I believe it's during that rotation that we will be going back to the original number of members, which is very difficult for us because, again, you know, we've appreciated everybody's membership and everybody's hard work, but whatever effort you put toward the committee is definitely going to be very helpful as we look through sort of the roster of people on the committee. So that's the only other thing that I thought would be
Okay.
useful for people to know.
Thanks, Carol. And just in case people don't understand, when it does come to our committee makeup, we have certain criteria we have to fill. So we need to make sure we have a good mix of representation on our committee: international, academic, state DOT, providers, researchers. So we would love to have you all be members. And if you truly, desire to be a member, when we do that rotation, please let us know that you're interested and we'll put out a call. But do understand that we can only take so many people and we have to fill those different criteria. It's very difficult to make that decision. So please don't ever feel slighted if you do not get selected, because we have so many incredible people that are involved with the committee and would like to be members, and it's just not possible to let you all on. So thank you for being active in it, even if you are not a formal committee member. That is incredibly important to us, that people still feel like they can participate even if they are not formal committee members. Okay, so I think we've covered that. I'd like to move on to talk about the new subcommittees. So we have an Equity of Innovative Mobility Services and Technology subcommittee that Charlotte Fry and Adam Cohen are heading up, and I'm going to turn it over to them to talk about their activities and their subcommittee.
Thanks, Jean. And I got a note from Charlotte that I believe she had to drop off at the top of the hour, so I don't know if she is with us. But we're really excited to be able to leading this subcommittee. And a little bit kind of update on kind of where we were at on this. We had our kickoff meeting at the annual meeting. So for those that were able to attend, that was terrific. If you weren't able to attend, we're going to try doing quarterly meetings. Our kickoff meeting had about 300 attendees. And our meetings, our quarterly meeting has also been pretty large as well. So we're doing our best to make sure that everybody stays engaged and provides feedback. You'll see us using some digital tools strategically to try to kind of get feedback from folks in this online format. We're also going to be kind of, at the quarterly meetings, continue to talk about research needs and kind of supporting Michael Berman on research needs from an equity perspective. And we'll also be kind of having presentations on equity and some key topics and things going on in the field. So if you have updates that you'd like to share on kind of future meetings for the subcommittee, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're always in need of volunteers. I'll put in, if you haven't signed up for the listserv, I'll put in a link in the chat so that way you can kind of sign up for that. I'll also share that the subcommittee has kind of sponsored a number of sessions at the Automated Road Transportation Symposium conference this week. Charlotte co-led a workshop on called Inclusive by Design, Creating an Equitable and Accessible Automated Future. For those that weren't able to attend the workshop, it actually had 3 different parts to it. The first part was on physical access. The second hour was equity. And the third hour was about automation and its impacts on the workforce. So with that being said, looking forward to everybody being involved, and I'll be glad to answer any questions about the subcommittee if anybody has any.
Great. Any questions? Thank you, Adam. Any questions for Adam on the subcommittee? All right, I don't see any yet. Let's move to, is anyone on the call from AP055 that wants to speak to any activities that you want to let folks know about? I don't know if Steve Yaffe is still on the line or not. I guess not. Let's see. One thing that I will mention, if Steve's not there, he sent Jean and I a message a little while ago. I don't know if folks on the line are familiar with the Trans Ed conferences, which are held from the other committee that we mentioned, AME50, which is Mobility and Access Committee, but they co-sponsor a conference called TransEd. There will be a conference in 2022, and that particular conference is being combined with the next TRB Demand Response Conference, which some of you may recall was held last one was held in Baltimore in April of 2018. So those 2 conferences are going to be merged, and they'll be held in Seattle in September of 2022. And there is a call for abstracts that I understand is being extended to October 29th. I haven't seen that call myself yet, but whenever I do, I'll make sure that everybody knows about it. So you have some time, with the due date being at the end of October, for that. So that's one announcement. Anybody else have announcements for those 2 committees at all?
Not for those. I do want to, Carol, mention that Bern just put in the chat that if anybody wants to have further discussions or other answers or questions answered, to connect with him on LinkedIn. So please feel free to do that. Feel free to connect with anyone on here if you want to further any conversations or start new ones.
That's great.
Someone just, Todd said you can speak on AME50.
Great. Todd,
All
if
right.
you want to unmute yourself, that's great. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. Good to see you both this afternoon. Yeah, you beat me to the punch on the Trans Ed conference. Our committee is pretty involved with that and is excited about the conference next year. So we encourage everyone to submit abstracts if you have something. I don't know if my dog is going to pipe in also while we're on the meeting, so I apologize in advance. Other than that, in terms of our committee, we're also going to have a call for posters. Or I believe it's already out. I can send the link in the chat shortly. But if you have topics for presentation at the annual meeting related to anything in accessible transportation, we encourage you to look at that call for posters. It looks like the deadline for that will be September 15th. And of course, we'll look for papers on accessible transportation topics for that committee as well. I'm the paper review coordinator for that committee. And then we're having our mid-year meeting on August 17th. So anyone, members and friends, anyone is welcome to participate. And so I can get Joey or Julie, the committee co-chairs, to forward you the meeting link. If you haven't received it already, just let me know.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Yep. I think next on our agenda is just a very brief discussion about kind of the status of our triennial strategic plan. And I know Brendan's going to make a few comments in a couple of minutes, but we are on tap to do a triennial strategic plan. However, we're still not aware of there is supposed to be a new template for that triennial strategic plan. I know we're very interested in anyone who's on the call that wants to participate in the development of that. We're very appreciative. Adam and Prachi did a wonderful job the last time, but it came right at the same time as the restructuring of the committees. So we did not really officially get to submit that. So we're just waiting for more guidance from TRB on that triennial strategic plan. And Jean, anything else before we have Brendan speak?
No, I don't think so. I don't think there's anything else on that topic.
Okay, take it away, Brendan.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah, good,
Yep.
because I sometimes see compatibility problems between my Mac and Microsoft Teams. Doesn't always work well. Yeah, that's interesting presentations. This committee is one of the more active ones within the group. So for those who don't know me, my name is Brendan Hemley. I'm chair of the AP020 Public Transportation Group, which has 12 committees, plus an executive committee. And that puts me on the Technical Activities Council, TAC, of Division A, which is the Technical Activities Division, which runs the committees, the call for papers, and the annual meeting. There are other divisions like the Cooperative Research Division and so forth and so on, some administrative divisions. In terms of the TSP, I think I mentioned at the annual meeting, but there's not been any new guidance. I haven't seen any. It's a challenging issue. In the reorganization, there was a desire, I guess, to shake up some committees and also make them a bit more accountable. But there are multiple objectives that are they're looking at the same time in terms of fostering creative approaches, fulfilling the objectives in terms of diversity and so forth, in terms of attracting young members, but also being responsible to the critical issues that the executive committee identifies every 2 years as part of their strategic planning process for all of TRB. And the TSB is viewed by that as a mechanism to assist in this sort of oversight of the committees, but there's some divergence of opinion of how detailed and detailed it should be, and how much it's used for just getting creative juices going versus performance review. So at this point, I think it's been a bit dormant because there are other fish to fry that have been more important. Later in the week, the TAC is meeting, and the TSP is not even on the agenda. There are other things that I'll come to. One is the annual meeting. The annual meeting, as you probably realize now, is planned to be in person. As much as the virtual conference this year in January was successful in terms of enabling people to participate a much wider number, it was far more expensive, and it was a big money loser. It was a lot more staff involved, plus the virtual platform. Staff, instead of having just to drop in and give announcements at each committee, there had to be staff for every single virtual meeting for hours. So it was expensive on many fronts. And although there were a lot more people, the vast majority of the people were not paying because they came from state DOTs or other sponsoring federal agencies and so forth. And all sponsors, organizational sponsors, can have any of their staff attend for free. So it's the sort of TRBs, and for various reasons between that and also federal cutbacks, TRB is a bit between a rock and a hard place right now. And there's sort of a thinking we're going to spend some time trying to think about the value of TRB brings and make sure that people recognize that and articulate that in perhaps a bit more successful ways than has been done in the past. So we're spending a fair amount of time on that. And also TRB's executive committee is restarting their strategic planning thinking. And so there's going to be a discussion of critical issues, top issues from every group leader. And there are 9 groups, plus I think the section heads as well. And so it's going to be a long discussion, and then they'll try to synthesize that as input into the critical issue identification of critical issues. So that seems to be what the main discussions of the TAC will be for this summer meeting. I'm not going to be able to attend in person, so it'll be virtual. I'm up in Canada, and the border is still challenging. Other things to mention, one of the things I really wanted to promote, sorry, back to the TSP. So basically, you should start the process. One of the things I'm going to encourage is that all the committees in the group have websites. You already do, but several of the committees do not. And so that seems to be a starting point to get the discussion growing. But one of the objectives I have, even though it's been a little bit sidetracked because of first the reorganization and then the virtual conference and then rethinking the new conference, which again is one other thing I wanted to mention. I think because of the budgetary constraints, there's going to be even more squeezing of sessions. So it's not ideal, but that's sort of the way that it is. But one of the objectives I have is to really foster better ties between the TRB committees and the public transportation group and associations, and in particular APTA, and to try to foster better linkages, because I think there are many areas of mutual interest, but the APTA is not particularly research oriented, and so sometimes it's a little bit hard to bridge that gap. I'm on the executive of the APTA RN Research and Technology Committee, and I think one of the things we had a discussion at the last meeting of the group chairs. One of the things I'm going to try to encourage is for each of the committees to identify somebody who is active within APTA and is on the APTA Connect discussion groups. They're basically listservs, if you want. But that's a really good mechanism for letting people know in the APTA community about interesting research that emerges out of TRB. And we have not been doing that very effectively. So I think that's one thing. And the other thing is the issue about practical papers and the whole effort to make TRR more academically competitive. And you've probably seen the notices that their impact factors increased dramatically. The practical papers have sort of got lost sight of a little bit. So we're starting a process of discussions with the TRR staff to see if there are mechanisms that we can take advantage of to try to, especially for our group, it's particularly important to try to put some more emphasis on applied practical research. So those are things that I'm working on with the group chairs, with the committee chairs. The other thing that I just noticed, but hopefully, I hope all of you have been subscribing to the e-newsletter. But if you saw the e-newsletter is being totally changed, and it's now going to be called TRB Weekly. And because of incompatibilities between the databases, one has to subscribe to the new TRB Weekly. There was a link in the last e-newsletter, though I'm sure there'll be other links. But it's very easy. You just go to my TRB, you go to my account, and then there's a button, there's a tab there. It says TRB Weekly. You click on that, and you sort of just check the ones whether you want to have information about everything or just specific areas of functionalities. But I encourage everybody to start that migration, because as of, I think it was mid-August, you will not receive the weekly newsletter unless you subscribe to the new one. I think those were the main things. Carol, Jean, anybody, any questions?
Nothing from my perspective. I know we're anxious to find out about the sort of what the format is going to be for the strategic plan, but that'll come, and we realize that. But again, to the group that's on the line, if anybody's interested in participating in its development, just let Jean or I know about it. I guess one thing, and you mentioned it, that we didn't mention at the very beginning, was that at least it's our understanding that the 2022 TRB annual meeting will be in person as of now.
Yes.
I think all of us recognize that that's really not all that far away, and things could change significantly between now and then. I don't know how many of you on the line are familiar with the ITS World Congress. That is taking place in person at the beginning of October. I am heavily involved in that Congress, and still have some doubts as to whether it will be 100% in person. That's the way it's moving forward. In fact, the preliminary program has already been published for that, but I think we all realize we have to be pretty flexible in the next however many months when we see the vaccination numbers and the numbers of the variants change over time.
Yes, it's a tough call. I know that also APTA is holding their multiple workshops in conjunction with each other in Philadelphia the first week of October, and their Transform annual meeting and the big expo, which has been postponed a couple times, first week of November.
No.
In Florida, and
right.
But we'll just play by ear. But at this point,
Yep.
they're planning for it to be in person.
Yeah, and Tan just made a comment. No, the ITS World Congress is not virtual. No, it's completely in person. It's in Hamburg, Germany, and there is no virtual component to that conference. They made that decision in May. They're sticking with it. I've been in discussion with people on the ITS World Congress Board of Directors, and the preliminary program is out, and one of our challenges in filling the program was finding people who would indeed be going, because we not only have whole countries that are not allowed to travel to Europe, but we have companies that are not allowing their employees to do either any travel in the foreseeable future or international travel. So that conference is completely in person, but as I say, we all need to sort of stay tuned. So anyway, any questions for Brendan?
There's a hands up.
Yeah, Matthew, can we just wait a second,
Okay.
Matthew? Because I want to see if there are any other questions for
Gary
Brendan.
has a question as well about what makes papers practice ready, because you mentioned the papers you are looking for a practical approach.
We're not using the term practice ready anymore. That got eliminated because of legal concerns from the lawyers of the academy as a whole. So that term is no longer used. I think they're referring to them as practical papers. And there's still a question, I think a check mark box in the review form. It's really a matter of subjective opinion by the reviewers. The problem has been that because the emphasis of TRR has been primarily on improving its academic competitivity, those have sort of fallen into a bucket that nobody's been working with. So that's why I started a process, and I have to pursue this. But there are some options of what to do with those practical papers, especially in our group. One of the other groups actually championed and collated, edited a special issue of TRR on aviation, which was a group effort. I think it was aviation, if I remember correctly. And so we might do the same thing if we can find volunteers who are willing to go beyond and above and beyond the cause. But there's no criteria for what makes a practical paper. It's purely subjective opinion by the reviewers.
Any other questions for Brendan?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Brendan, for the update. Matt, do you want to give us an update on the IATR conference?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, a lot of people have been asking about it, Carol. We just made a decision last week that primarily because of the Canadian travel ban, which is still in place, and we don't know when it's going to be lifted, we just couldn't move forward with our in-person conference for Memphis. So we just got word that the hotel has allowed us to kick it back to 2022 in September, like around the 23rd. So I'll have more information on that. So we are going to go in person in 2022, but we've decided to go virtual for this year, like we did last year. And we're going to be tentatively, we have dates that would be December 13th through the 17th. So we tried to plan dates that don't interfere with other conferences that are floating around. And if anyone knows of any that might conflict, we'd appreciate that. We're also developing the program now. So if anybody has any ideas about the program, I know, Carol, you had a good idea about Gecko and some of the stuff they're doing in Europe. So far on the program, we have a boot camp that will be a primer and introduction to UAM. We have another one on the nuts and bolts of electrification. And we also have a food and package delivery, a primer, since there's a lot of cross-pollination between logistics, package, and food delivery now with TNCs and taxis. We're going to cover that. And the big item is really the project that Adam Cohen has been working on with IATR, and that's the automated vehicle implementation best practices and model regulations. So we've had a scoping hearing on that, and we're going to be putting forth guiding principles for comment and encouraging various stakeholders from around the world to comment on that. And if anybody else has any other ideas, we are doing a session on Carmageddon and what regulators can do to prepare for what's already started, especially when the enhanced unemployment runs out on Labor Day. Unfortunately, we're expecting a lot of craziness on the streets. So that's the ITR conference. I'll send to the committee and to Prachi and yourself, Carol, some of the details as they unfold. But if anybody on the committee, because we've worked very closely with a lot of TRB folks, has any ideas, especially on the hackathon, we've done 5 hackathons with Susan in Berkeley. We're going to probably scope out a hackathon at the December conference to be implemented in 2022. And so we're open to topics, and we have a little bit of time, but not too much. So I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of it, and feel free to reach me offline if you have any questions about it. And I look forward to working with everybody.
Thanks a lot for the update, especially on the conference. That's really good. Being able to pivot quickly is, I think, going to be in our vocabulary for a long time, especially where conferences are concerned. So we've got a couple of hands up. Let's see. Mike Highland has his hand up.
Oh, that was an accident. Sorry about that.
No worries at all, Mike. Let's see.
And Carol, I know that that I saw Liz come on. I don't know if Bev is on as well, but if one of them is on, they may want to. We have on the agenda for them to discuss the conference on advancing transportation equity. So Liz and or Bev, if you want to unmute and give us an update on that.
Sure. Bev, are you on?
I didn't see the name.
Well, I can talk for a little bit. Hi, everybody. My name is Liz Williams, and I am one of the co-chairs of the Conference on Advancing Transportation Equity, which is being sponsored by this committee, along with I don't remember the new number of it, but with the Equity and Transportation Committee. And so we've been planning this conference. You've probably been hearing about it for a really long time because we've been planning it for, it seems like, the past 3 or 4 years, but really only a couple. Initially, our conference was going to happen in, very beginning, we were thinking that our conference was going to happen in June of this year, but that was pushed back to September because we were hoping that if we were giving ourselves a few more months, that we would have an opportunity to have that in-person meeting. But similarly to what was just discussed about the ITE meeting, National Academies a few months ago made the sort of executive decision that this was going to proceed as an all virtual conference. And that actually had a lot more to do with securing catering contracts than anything else. There was a lot of issues with getting contracts and getting deposits put down for the food and the other accommodations that we need. So that was sort of an uncharted territory that we were in with setting up the conference. So now the dates of the conference are September 9th, 10th. So that's a Thursday and a Friday. And then a 13th and a 14th. So that's a Monday and Tuesday. So it's going to happen Thursday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday. And it will be an all virtual event. We just put the finishing touches on the program. We really tried when we were doing the in-person event to go out of our way to schedule activities and opportunities for interacting in sort of non-traditional ways. Unfortunately, because we've moved over to the virtual platform and we had to pivot on a bit of a short notice, we have had to drop some of those activities from our conference, but we're hoping that we're going to be able to work with the with TRB and the National Academies to incorporate those into the annual meeting this year. And so, like I said, we've got a pretty full program. We're moving forward with figuring out how to allocate some of the subsidized registrations that we have and encouraging students and other non-traditional conference attendees to participate. But everybody that submitted an abstract should have been notified by now. Registration's open. And we're sort of just putting the finishing touches on figuring out sort of who's going to be where when. But we're in pretty good shape to have this conference, in September. Hopefully, the next time we have this conference, we'll be able to have an in-person event. So things are moving along pretty well, I'd say. And I'm happy to talk about this, or with any more specific details, or answer any more questions about the conference.
Great, thank you. Does anybody have any questions about the conference? And I know we've been asked in the chat if we'll kind of compile all these events and send them out in email blast, and we can certainly do that. And we'll be sharing minutes from this meeting as well, so you'll have them there too. So we will get the information out to everyone.
One quick thing that the email blast made me think about, and that is, we're looking for just a little bit of feedback from folks on the new kind of email format. As you've recognized, we have moved away from Google Groups. We're no longer using Google Groups. We're now using, of course, the name of it completely.
MailChimp.
Thank you. When you're getting ready to say something, another senior moment on my part. But anyway, now that we're using this new format, I don't know if anybody has any comments or questions or anything related to that. I think, we'd like to hear about it. We moved to MailChimp because trying to manage the Google group with the sheer number of people who are on our mailing list has become impossible. And this way you can control things yourself.
Yeah.
So that's why we moved to MailChimp. So I saw, Tan, I think you had one comment there: too frequent, too many reminder emails about today's meeting. I think that's a good point. We just want to remind people when these things are coming up.
Yeah.
So we can,
just quick note there, Tan. So I sent an email on Monday, and then I got some people saying the add-on which I had used for putting this on your calendar and getting the meeting details, some people didn't like using them. So question for the group is, do you like these add-ons, or should I just paste, like my second email I sent yesterday is I just pasted the MS Teams information on the email itself. So does people have a preference? Do people have a preference? Else I could just do both. I can put it as an add-on for people who like it and link that conference detail. Put that as a link too.
Yeah, good question.
Did they find the add-on helpful with the calendar?
I do. I like the calendar add-on, but
I do, because I'm always concerned that I'm not going to remember to put that on my calendar when I read it.
Right.
So, but I know everybody has different preferences for allowing sort of third-party access to the calendar. I know that was an issue during the 2021 TRB annual meeting, because if you wanted things on your calendar, you ended up with a whole separate calendar that came from TRB.
Right.
So
right, exactly.
Yeah. So I guess
right.
everybody has their own, their own thoughts about this.
Perfect. Well, I've taken note of some of your comments, Tan. I think you may have seen a lot of emails. Maybe I have two different emails for you, or likely not the same email twice, but two different emails for you going to the same place. So let me have a check there.
Yeah, that's a good point too. So.
And just so Brendan sees, Renee's comment. Put a comment in there about having some ability to allow a limited number of speakers at TRB have a, free or reduced cost to speak, because it is a barrier to getting some folks there to speak, that it is a very expensive event to attend. So
Yeah.
that's for TRB to do with as they will.
Exactly. I think one thing, and this is just personally, the charging for the virtual conference, and I'm glad Brendan pointed out that, it ended up being extremely expensive, and I can see why that was the case. But I think one thing they did really well was not charge for any of the committee meetings, but they also charged basically full registration fee to attend any of the posters or the actual sessions virtually. And I know personally that was a barrier to a lot of people. If indeed this moves forward in the expected in-person format, I think we are going to run into, Renee, exactly what you said. There is a barrier. I know that's a barrier to other conferences as well, that we don't have as much of a diversity as we should. So with TRB's focus on diversity, we'll make sure that gets passed along to everybody, Brendan, and everybody else that we have access to, because you're making a good point. So, all right, we've got about 5 minutes left. Jean, did you have anything else that?
I don't have anything. I just wanted to make sure that if anybody else had anything they wanted to take a minute or two to tell us about any exciting things going on, that people have a minute or two to do that if you would like. Just raise your hand if you have anything. Matt, you need to unraise your hand. Unless you want to speak again.
And if not,
Sorry about that. Lower my hand. Okay.
No worries.
What about it? I mean, I do have something to add. We are partnering with PARC actually for a session as well. The Road Transport Association internationally, and so I forgot to mention that. But we'll have an agenda out soon. We're going to be doing a session that's talking about innovation models with leading stakeholders from different technology modes, and they have a huge paper and workshop that Christos has worked on from the Rhode Island DOT, and I'd be happy to share that with you. Jonathan Spear and Anne Severine, people from the International Coordinating Council, have been very involved in it, and it's nearing fruition. So we're happy to partner with them. So that'll be on the agenda as well for the virtual conference in December. But I now will lower my hand. Now that I know.
And Jacob's got his hand up.
Hi, I'm Jacob Yan from the University of Florida. So I want to let everybody know that there is an upcoming conference called 2021 Research to Practice Transit Symposium, co-organized by University of Florida Transportation Institute, Caltrans, APTA, and the T School University Transportation Center. So it will be a free online event. Some of you might have seen the save the date. We will have a call for abstract out soon. I want to let everybody know that it's a continuation of the last year's event called Interstate Transit Research Symposium. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk about it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And we place links for your events here. We'll make sure they go out in the meeting minutes as well.
Great, thank you so much.
Yes.
Great. Let's see.
Matt's hand is still up, but
All right. So we're about, I guess we give people 2 minutes back.
Yes, 2 minutes back to your day. Isn't that
Better
generous?
than zero.
So really want to thank everybody for your
Yeah.
active participation in this meeting. And we look forward to hopefully seeing some of you in person in January at the annual meeting. We'll be sending out information about that. And we'll be sharing minutes from this meeting. This meeting was also recorded, so we'll be sharing the recording of that as well. So if you need anything from the committee or have any questions for Carol or I or anybody else on here, please send those forward. And I think now I'm probably only giving you 1 minute back of your day.
Well, again, one's better than zero. So, all right. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good
And
day,
we'll
all.
be in touch. Take care. Bye.